If you are sitting for fixes in this year, Waec 2026, this video is meant for you. You know, this is Waec syllabus for fixes for this year is comprehensive, covering fundamental principles of matter, energy, and the physical laws governing the universe. So the examination is structured into three papers. You have paper one, which is objectives, paper two, which is theory, and the paper three, which is practical. Now, the first topic you need to read, go and read everything under mechanics. So under mechanics, you read interaction of matter, space, and time. You know, mechanics is often the most significant portion of the exam, focusing on how objects move and interact. Then read fundamental and derived quantities, units of measurement, dimensions, and scalar and vector quantities. Then read kinematics, under it speed, velocity, acceleration, and equations of motion. Then read dynamics. Under this you have Newton's law of motion, conservation of momentum, and friction. Make sure you study statics. Under it you have equilibrium of forces, center of gravity, and the principle of moment. No, this is often tested in practicals. Don't forget that. Then work, energy, and power. Under it, you have conservation of energy, kinetic and potential energy, and mechanical advantage of simple machines. So make sure you read this very well. Then read fluids at rest. Under it, you have density, relative density, Archimedes principle, and the law of flotation. So after this, make sure you read topics under heat energy, where you have thermodynamics. So under this, you have thermometry, different types of thermometers and temperature scales. Then thermal expansion. Under it, you have linear, area, and volume expansivity of solid and liquid. Make sure you read them very well. Then under gas laws, we need to read gas law, Boyle's law, Charles law, and the pressure law. Read them very well. Then calorimetry, where you have specific heat capacity and latent heat of fusion, vaporization. So read them very well. Then waves and optics is very important. Under it, you have general wave properties, where we have reflection, refraction, diffraction, interference, and polarization. So make sure you read them very well. Then you have general wave properties. Make sure you read everything you have under it. So we have light waves, reflection at plane and curved mirror, refraction through lenses. Make sure you read them very well. Then the optical instruments, where you have microscope, telescope, and the human eye. Make sure you read them very well. Then sound waves. Under this, we have production, transmission, speed of sound, echoes, and characteristics like pitch, loudness, and quality. So make sure you read them very well. Then read electricity and magnetism. Under it, read electrostatistics, where you have electric charges, Coulomb's law, and capacitors. Read them very well. Then current, electricity. Read them very well, where you have Ohm's law, series and parallel circuits, resistivity, and electrical energy and power. Read them very well. Then electromagnetism. Read them very well, where you have magnetic fields, electromagnetic induction, and the operation of transformers and AC and DC generators. Study them very well. Then other modern fixes. This section covers 28th century discoveries, where you have atomic structure. So under it, read structure of the atom. where you have models of the atom and energy quantization. Then you have radioactivity, where we have alpha, beta, and gamma decay, half-life and nuclear energy, where you have fission and fusion. Read them very well. Then quantum effect too, where you have photoelectric effect, thermonic emission, and X-rays. Study them very well. Then another part that we need to study, that one is coming under practical. So you have to study mechanics. Often the simple pendulum or balancing a metal rule. So you have to study that one very well. We are talking about equilibrium of forces under it. Then optics, where we have refraction through a glass block or local length of a lens. Make sure you read them very well. Then electricity, where you have using a potentiometer or meter bridge to find unknown resistance or resistivity. So this is coming under your practical. So if you can study these topics very well, I assured you, you are going to have your distinction in your physics. So prepare very well. I wish you best of luck. Thank you.